evening, and welcome back to Red Frequency TV. Somehow, we found the frequency again. Tonight's transmission doesn't begin with a haunted house. It doesn't begin with a cursed object. And it doesn't begin with a monster hiding in the dark. It begins in an ordinary neighborhood. On an ordinary night, with an ordinary babysitter who thought she was walking into just another shift. Police reports would eventually give this case a name, but the people who survived it remembered something much simpler. A man, standing perfectly still, watching. They would come to know him as the Still Man. Before we begin tonight's transmission, lock your doors. Take one last look out your window, because if someone was standing out there, you'd want to know now. And as always, don't listen alone. Don't watch alone. I never thought babysitting would be the reason I almost died. When people ask me what happened that night, they usually expect me to tell them about the blood, the screaming, or the police. But that's not how this story starts. It starts with what felt like the most normal Friday night of my life. My name is Emily, and at the time I was 20 years old, home from college for the summer trying to make some extra money. I'd been babysitting for years. It was easy money, honestly. Most nights, the kids watched a movie, ate too much junk food, fell asleep on the couch, and their parents came home before midnight. Nothing exciting ever happened, which is exactly why I wasn't worried when I pulled into the Harper family's driveway just after 7. It was one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every house looked almost the same. Kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Neighbors waved from their porches. You could hear lawn sprinklers clicking somewhere down the block. It felt safe. Mr. and Mrs. Harper greeted me at the front door with the same smiles they always had. Their 2 kids came running over. Before I even had both feet inside, one wrapped his arms around my waist. The other started telling me about some dinosaur he'd learned about at school without even stopping to breathe. I laughed. It felt like every other babysitting job I'd ever taken. Even Buster, their golden retriever, came trotting over with a toy hanging out of his mouth, his tail thumping against the hallway wall. Mrs. Harper handed me a folded piece of paper. "Our numbers are on here just in case," she said. I smiled. I probably won't need them. Looking back, I wish I had never said those words. About 20 minutes later, their car disappeared down the street. I locked the front door, checked the back door, made sure every window downstairs was shut. I remember thinking, all right, just a few hours, easy money. If I had looked out the living room window one more time before I walked away, I would have seen him standing perfectly still across the street, watching the house, watching me, and I never would have stayed. At least, I'd like to believe I wouldn't have. The Harper family lived only about 15 minutes from my apartment, but I'd been babysitting for them long enough that their house almost felt familiar. Mr. Harper was one of those dads who always cracked the same corny jokes. Mrs. Harper always apologized for leaving the house a mess, even though it was probably one of the cleanest houses I'd ever been in. Their kids, they were honestly great. Ethan had just turned 9 and thought he knew everything. His little sister, Lily, was 6, and if she trusted you, she'd talk your ear off for hours. Then there was Buster. If you walked into that house and didn't pet him first, he'd follow you around until you did. That's just who he was. As soon as the Harpers pulled out of the driveway, Ethan grabbed a game controller and looked at me with this huge grin. "Can we stay up till 10? I laughed. "Nice try." My mom said 9. He sighed dramatically. "Worth a shot." Lily giggled from the couch. While they argued over what movie to watch, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my best friend, Hannah. "Me, babysitting again. Easiest money ever, lol." She replied almost instantly, "Hannah, you say that every time." A second notification popped up before I could answer. It was Marcus. Marcus had been one of my closest friends since high school. Calm, dependable, and somehow always the first person to check in on everyone else. "Marcus, still at the Harper house?" "Me." "Yep." "Marcus, cool, be safe." I smiled. That was such a Marcus thing to say. Not dramatic, just thoughtful. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the coffee table. From the front window, I could see the house next door. The porch light had just come on. I smiled without even realizing it. Ryan lived there. We'd talked plenty of times over the past couple of years whenever I babysat for the Harpers. Sometimes we'd wave if we happened to be outside at the same time. Sometimes we'd end up talking for 20 minutes without realizing it. Nothing had ever happened between us. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a little crush on him. I don't know if he felt the same way. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, it was nice knowing someone I trusted lived only a few steps away. At the time, that thought made me feel safe. It's strange how your mind can turn an ordinary memory into something painful. Because now, every time I think about that house, I don't remember the porch lights, or the movie the kids picked, or the jokes we laughed at. I remember thinking, if anything goes wrong, Ryan's right next door. I had no idea that someone else already knew that too. By around 8 o'clock, the house settled into that comfortable kind of quiet. The kids had finally agreed on a movie after arguing for what felt like forever. Lily had claimed one end of the couch with a blanket wrapped around her like a burrito. Ethan sat on the floor 5 feet from the TV, completely convinced sitting closer somehow made movies better. Buster stretched out near the front door with one eye open, the way dogs do when they're pretending to sleep. I remember looking around the living room and thinking, this is probably the easiest babysitting job I've ever had. If only I'd known. About halfway through the movie, my phone buzzed. It was Hannah. Hannah, still alive over there? I smiled and sent a selfie with the kids making goofy faces in the background. Me, barely. Ethan's been correcting dinosaur facts for 20 minutes. Almost immediately. Marcus, need me to bring you coffee later? I laughed under my breath. Me, I'll survive. I slipped my phone back into my hoodie pocket and glanced toward the front window for just a second. I thought I saw someone outside. I frowned. It wasn't unusual. People walked dogs through the neighborhood all the time. Still, something about it felt off. I stepped a little closer to the window. Nothing. Just empty sidewalks, a few porch lights, the occasional car driving past. I actually laughed at myself. You're starting to scare yourself. That's what I remember thinking. Then Buster stood up. Not suddenly, not aggressively. He just slowly got to his feet. His ears perked forward. His eyes stayed fixed on the front door. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared. I looked over at him. "What is it, buddy?" He didn't even look at me. His eyes never moved. For a few seconds, neither did I. Then Buster relaxed. He turned around, walked back to his bed, circled it twice, and laid back down like nothing had happened. I shook my head. Guess it was nothing. I wish that had been true, because years later, after everything the police told me, after everything they found, one detail has never left my mind. Buster wasn't looking at the front door. He was looking at someone standing on the other side of it. I didn't think much about it after that. Dogs stare at random things all the time. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The movie ended a few minutes later, and Ethan immediately started asking if he could play one more game before bed. "You already know the answer," I said. He groaned. "You're worse than my mom." "I'll take that as a compliment." Lily laughed so hard, she almost spilled her juice. For a little while, everything felt normal again. I cleaned up the empty pizza plates, while the kids argued over whose turn it was to put the movie blanket away. Buster wandered into the kitchen behind me, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I grabbed his food bowl. "Hungry?" His tail wagged once. I filled his bowl and slid it across the floor. Normally, Buster would have buried his face in it before I even let go. Instead, he stopped. He looked past me, toward the sliding glass door. His ears lifted again. The fur along his back slowly stood up. A low growl rolled from his chest. Not loud, not angry, just a warning. I turned around. The backyard looked exactly the way it always had. A wooden privacy fence, the kids' swing set, the patio, nothing else. I unlocked the sliding door just enough to peek outside. Cool night air drifted into the kitchen. "Buster," I looked out into the darkness. Nothing, not a sound, not a person, not even the wind. I locked the door again. Guess we're both getting jumpy. Buster never touched his food. He walked back into the living room instead. I remember watching him disappear around the corner and thinking that was strange. Then my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. "Ryan, hey, random question. Are you still babysitting next door tonight?" I smiled without thinking. "Me? Yeah, LOL. Why?" A few seconds passed. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then came back. Finally, his message came through. "Ryan, probably nothing. Ryan, I just thought I saw somebody standing across the street earlier." I felt my stomach tighten. I looked toward the front window. Across the street, there was nobody there. I started typing. "You probably saw someone walking their dog." Before I could hit send, Buster barked. One single, violent bark, the kind I'd never heard come from him before. Buster's bark hit me so hard, I actually jumped. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't normal. I'd heard him bark at delivery drivers. I'd heard him bark when squirrels ran across the fence. I'd even heard him bark at Ethan when he wore one of those ridiculous Halloween masks around the house. This was different. It was one sharp bark, then complete silence. The kind of silence that makes you realize how quiet everything else is. I looked toward the living room. Buster? He was standing in front of the large picture window, completely still. His body was tense. His tail wasn't wagging. He wasn't growling anymore. He was just staring. I walked over and stood beside him. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Streetlights, parked cars, a couple of porch lights glowing across the street. Nothing moved. Ryan's message was still open on my phone. I just thought I saw somebody standing across the street earlier. I looked at the timestamp, 8 minutes ago. Without really thinking about it, I texted him back. Me, I don't see anybody. He replied almost immediately. Ryan, good, Ryan. Maybe I was seeing things. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. See, there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. A quiet neighborhood. Darkness. Your eyes playing tricks on you. That's all it was. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. Behind me, Ethan walked into the kitchen. I'm getting sleepy. I smiled. Good. Go brush your teeth. For real this time? Yes, for real this time. He rolled his eyes dramatically before disappearing upstairs, with Lily right behind him. I waited until I heard the bathroom sink running. Then I glanced at the front door. Still locked. I checked the deadbolt anyway. Locked. I checked the chain. Locked. I peeked through the peephole. Empty porch. I don't know why I did it. Something just kept telling me. Check again. Looking back now, I think my instincts were trying to warn me before my mind caught up. As I turned away from the door, my phone buzzed one more time. Another message from Ryan. Only this one made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ryan, Emily, Ryan. I never said he was still outside. Ryan. So, who were you looking for? For a second, I just stared at my phone. I read Ryan's message once, then again, then a third time. I never said he was still outside. So, who were you looking for? My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't even know how to answer that. Maybe because I didn't have one. I finally typed back, me. I don't know. Before I could send another message, Ryan started typing. Then he called me. I answered immediately. Hey, I said, trying to laugh it off. You're starting to creep me out. There was a pause, not a long one, just enough for me to notice. I wasn't trying to, Ryan said. I just saw you looking through the peephole. I frowned. What? I was taking my trash can back up the driveway. I looked over, and you were standing at the front door, looking outside. I slowly turned toward the front window. Ryan's porch light was still on. I could barely make out his silhouette across the yard. He lifted one hand and waved, almost instinctively. I waved back. See? Everything was fine. I actually laughed. Okay, I officially scared myself. Ryan chuckled. Told you. I'll let you get back to babysitting. Yeah, thanks. No problem. The call ended. I locked my phone and shook my head. Get it together, Emily. That's what I told myself. I walked upstairs to check on the kids. Ethan was already half asleep with a book on his chest. Lily had somehow fallen asleep with every stuffed animal she owned piled around her. I smiled, pulled their blankets up, turned off the hallway light, and quietly walked back downstairs. The living room was darker now. Only the television cast a soft blue glow across the room. Buster? No answer. He wasn't on his bed anymore. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. The dining room. Nothing. Buster? Then I heard it. Not barking, not growling. A soft whine. It was coming from the laundry room. I followed the sound. Buster was standing in front of the back door, frozen, his nose pressed against the glass, whining so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I stepped beside him and looked into the backyard. At first, I saw nothing. Then, the motion light clicked on. The yard flooded with light. The swing set, the fence, the patio. Empty. I frowned. What are you looking at, buddy? The light stayed on for another 10 seconds. then shut off. Darkness swallowed the backyard again, and just before my own reflection filled the glass, I thought I saw a tall figure standing perfectly still beyond the fence. I blinked. It was gone. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light. Years later, I would learn the police found fresh footprints in the wet grass outside that fence, exactly where I thought I'd seen someone standing, which meant, for the first time that night, I hadn't imagined a thing. I didn't call the police. I know that's the question everyone asks me now. Why didn't you call 911? Because at that moment, I honestly didn't believe I'd seen someone. I believed I'd scared myself. A shadow, a reflection, my imagination filling in blanks after Ryan's text. That's all it was, or at least, that's what I needed to believe. I locked the back door again anyway. Then I reached up and flipped the switch that turned on the backyard floodlights. If somebody really had been out there, the lights would have exposed them. Nothing, just an empty yard. I stood there another 30 seconds before finally walking away. Buster, he still hadn't moved. I knelt beside him and scratched behind his ears. You've officially made me paranoid. His tail never wagged. He kept staring through the glass. I finally gave up trying to figure out what had him so worked up. The kids were asleep. Every door was locked. Every downstairs window was closed. Everything was exactly the way it should have been. I decided to make myself a cup of tea, anything to calm my nerves. As the kettle heated up, I leaned against the kitchen counter and checked my phone. A couple of notifications. One from Hannah. Hannah, how's babysitting? Still surviving? I smiled. Me, barely. Buster's acting weird tonight, almost instantly. Hannah, dogs know stuff we don't. I rolled my eyes. Me, don't start. She sent back a laughing emoji. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then, the kettle began to whistle. At the exact same time, there was a knock. 3 slow knocks. Knock, a few seconds. Knock, another pause. Knock, not frantic, not loud, just patient. Every muscle in my body tightened. It was almost 9 o'clock. The Harpers weren't supposed to be home for hours. Ryan would have texted me if he needed something. I walked quietly into the living room. The knocks didn't come again. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. I opened the front porch camera app the Harpers had shown me once before. The live feed loaded. Empty porch. I stared at the screen for another few seconds. Nothing moved. I almost laughed at myself again. Then Buster let out the deepest growl I'd heard all night. Not toward the front door, toward the hallway behind me. I turned around. The hallway was empty, but one thing wasn't. The coat closet door, the one I knew I'd closed earlier, was now standing open. Only a few inches, just enough for darkness to spill into the hallway. And I was suddenly certain I hadn't left it that way. I just stood there, staring at the closet. Maybe I left it open. Maybe Ethan grabbed a board game earlier. Maybe I was remembering it wrong. I wanted one of those explanations to be true, because the other possibility, the one quietly creeping into the back of my mind, didn't make any sense. Buster, I whispered. He wouldn't move. His eyes were locked on that crack in the closet door. The low growl never stopped. I slowly walked toward it, one step, then another. The hardwood floor creaked under my feet. Every sound suddenly felt too loud. I reached for the doorknob. I remember noticing how cold it felt. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. Winter coats, rain boots, a vacuum cleaner, nothing else. I let out a nervous laugh. Seriously, Emily? I was embarrassing myself. I shut the closet door, made sure it clicked all the way closed. Then I leaned against the wall for a second, trying to slow my breathing. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. 1, 2, 3. I froze. Ethan? No answer. Lily? Still nothing. The footsteps stopped. I looked up toward the second floor. Maybe one of the kids had gotten out of bed. I started climbing the stairs. Halfway up, I heard Ethan's voice, sleepy, confused. Emily? I'm here, I answered quickly. You okay? He rubbed his eyes as he stepped into the hallway. I thought somebody was walking. A chill ran through me. I thought that was you. He shook his head. I've been asleep. I looked toward Lily's room. She was still sound asleep, curled up with her stuffed animals. The hallway was empty. No one else was there. I forced a smile. It was probably the house settling. He looked unconvinced. So, nobody's up here? I glanced down both ends of the hallway. No. He nodded slowly. Okay. I tucked him back into bed and waited until his eyes closed again. As I reached his bedroom door, I heard it, very faint. From downstairs, click, the unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking. Every thought in my head stopped. I knew I'd locked that deadbolt. I remembered checking it. Twice. I stood perfectly still listening. Nothing. Then, Buster exploded into barking downstairs. Not one bark, not two. Relentless, furious. The kind of barking that said there was someone in the house. Buster had never barked like that before. It wasn't the kind of bark dogs make when somebody rings the doorbell. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't curiosity. It was panic. Raw, desperate panic. Ethan, I whispered, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart wasn't. Stay in your room. His eyes got wide. What's wrong? I don't know yet. That wasn't a lie. I just knew something wasn't right. I stepped into Lily's room. She was still asleep, hugging her stuffed rabbit. I gently shook her shoulder. Lily. She blinked up at me. I need you to come with me, okay? Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. I smiled, even though I was terrified. I just need you to stay close to me. She nodded and reached for my hand. I grabbed Ethan's hand with my other one. Whatever happens, I need both of you to listen to me. They nodded. I slowly led them into the hallway. Downstairs, Buster was still barking. Then he stopped. Just like that. Silence. Complete silence. Somehow, that scared me even more, because Buster never just stopped barking. Not unless something had changed, or someone had made him stop. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over 911 before I could press it. The front door camera sent a notification. Motion detected. My stomach dropped. I opened the live feed. The porch was empty. No one standing there. No one walking away. Nothing. Then I noticed something. The camera wasn't pointed where it had been earlier. It had been tilted, just slightly, enough that part of the front walkway was no longer visible. I frowned. That hadn't happened by itself. I zoomed in. The picture became grainy. Then, for less than a second, a figure crossed the edge of the screen, too fast to make out clearly. Tall, dark, gone. The camera froze. The loading circle spun. Then, the feed disconnected. Camera offline. I stared at those two words. No signal, no video, nothing. Behind me, Lily squeezed my hand. Emily, her voice was barely above a whisper. Who's standing outside my window? Every muscle in my body locked. Very slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway window. The curtain wasn't completely closed. There was a narrow gap, just wide enough to make me wonder if someone had been there, watching us the entire time. I didn't answer Lily. I couldn't. My body just froze. I looked toward the window. The curtain barely moved. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was my imagination. I told myself that I needed to. I slowly walked over and pulled the curtain back. Nothing, just the side yard, the wooden fence, Ryan's porch light glowing next door, empty. I let out a shaky breath. Lily. I knelt down in front of her. Did you actually see somebody? She nodded. A man. My heart skipped. Where? He was looking in. Ethan immediately stepped closer to us. No, he wasn't. His voice cracked. You're right. I didn't know what to say. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. No caller ID. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I answered. Hello? Nothing. Not even breathing. Hello? Still nothing. I was about to hang up. Then a calm voice spoke. Quiet. Controlled. Almost polite. You shouldn't whisper. Every hair on my arm stood up. What? The little girl? A short pause. She's scared. I couldn't breathe. Nobody should have known Lily was awake. Nobody should have known we were whispering. I grabbed both kids and backed away from the window. Who is this? Silence. Then I've been standing here long enough to know she sleeps with the rabbit every night. I looked at Lily. She was clutching the stuffed rabbit against her chest. The room started spinning. That wasn't a guess. He knew. He'd been watching. For how long? My voice shook. If you're outside my house. I'm calling the police. His answer came immediately. Calm, almost curious. I know. Another pause. So are your friends. I froze. What? Hannah. Marcus. He spoke their names one at a time, like he was reading them from a list. My blood ran cold. I had never said their names. Not once. Not on the phone. Not out loud. Then came the last sentence. Soft. Matter of fact. Oh, you should stop looking outside. I'm not out there anymore. The call disconnected. The room fell completely silent. I slowly lowered the phone. For the first time that night, I wasn't wondering if someone was watching us. I knew they were. I just didn't know from where. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there with my phone still pressed against my ear, staring into nothing. My heart was beating so hard it actually hurt. He knew Hannah. He knew Marcus. He knew about Lily's rabbit. None of that made sense. Unless he'd been watching me for a lot longer than tonight. I snapped myself out of it. No, I couldn't stand there thinking. The kids were depending on me. Ethan, I said, as calmly as I could, I need you to be really brave for me. His eyes were full of fear, but he nodded. I need you to take Lily into your parents' bedroom. Lock the door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. What about you? He asked. I'll be right behind you. That wasn't true, but I needed them moving. They hurried down the hallway, and I waited until I heard the bedroom doors shut. The lock clicked. Good. I immediately dialed 911. The phone rang once, twice. A dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? I took a shaky breath. I'm babysitting 2 children. I think someone's outside the house. And I swallowed hard. I think he's been watching us. The dispatcher stayed calm. What's the address? I gave it to her. Are all the doors and windows locked? Yes. Are you in a secure room? Not yet. Okay. I need you to stay on the line with me. Officers are being dispatched now. For the first time all night, I felt a tiny bit of relief. Someone was coming. I wasn't alone anymore. Then the dispatcher asked, "Ma'am, do you have any pets in the home?" I looked around the hallway. Buster? Silence. He should have been right beside me. He always stayed close when he was nervous. "Buster?" I called a little louder. Nothing. The dispatcher heard me. "Is that your dog?" "Yes." I don't know where he went." I walked carefully toward the stairs. Every light downstairs was still on. The front door was still closed. The living room looked exactly the way I'd left it, but Buster was nowhere in sight. A knot formed in my stomach. Buster, still nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard the sound of nails scraping across hardwood. Not running, not walking, scraping, like he was backing away from something. It was coming from the kitchen. I took one slow step toward the sound, then another. The dispatcher kept talking, trying to keep me calm, but I barely heard her because just before I reached the kitchen doorway, I noticed something that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. The back door was standing wide open, and the cold night air was pouring into the house. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It rushed into the kitchen like someone had opened the door only seconds ago. The curtains drifted slightly in the night air. The dispatcher was still talking. "Ma'am, are you still there?" I swallowed. "The back door is open." A brief pause. "Did you leave it open?" "No. I checked it. I locked it. I know I locked it." "Okay," she said calmly. "Do not go outside. Officers are only a few minutes away." A few minutes. It sounded so close, and somehow so far away. "Buster!" My voice barely came out. Nothing. No bark. No growl. No whine. I stepped into the kitchen anyway. Every instinct told me not to, but I couldn't leave him. I reached the doorway and looked outside. The patio was empty. The swing in the backyard hung perfectly still. The motion light was on, but there was no one there. "Buster!" Still nothing. Then a faint scratching sound. Not outside. Inside. Behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my phone. The pantry door, slowly, almost silently, it creaked open another inch. I stared at it. The dispatcher heard my breathing change. "Emily, what do you see?" I couldn't answer. I walked toward the pantry, one careful step at a time. The scratching stopped. I grabbed the handle, pulled the door open. "Buster!" He was curled into the very back corner, shaking. I'd never seen him like that. Not once. He looked up at me with wide eyes, then glanced past my shoulder. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking toward the open back door, as if he was terrified of whatever had just been standing there. Then my phone buzzed against my ear. A second call, unknown number. At the exact same time, the dispatcher said, "Emily, I need you to answer me." For one split second, I was holding two calls, one from the police, one from the man who'd been watching us. And somehow, I knew if I answered the wrong one, everything was about to get worse. I declined the second call. Immediately, there wasn't even a decision to make. I stayed with the dispatcher. "I'm still here," I whispered. "Good," she answered. "Officers are less than 2 minutes away." 2 minutes. I looked at Buster. He still hadn't moved from the pantry. I'd never seen him this scared, not even during thunderstorms. I knelt down. "It's okay, buddy." The second I touched his collar, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Declined. Again. It rang a third time. Declined. A fourth. Declined. Then it stopped. A text message appeared instead. Unknown number. "You should have answered." I stared at the screen. Another message came through before I could react. You're wasting time. Then another, go check on Ethan. My stomach dropped. I turned and sprinted out of the kitchen. Ethan, Lily. I took the stairs two at a time. The dispatcher was shouting my name through the phone. I barely heard her. I reached the master bedroom door, still locked. Ethan, it's me. It's Emily. I heard the lock click. The door opened just enough for Ethan to peek out. His face was pale. We heard somebody downstairs. My blood ran cold. What? We thought it was you. Walking around, I slowly looked back toward the staircase. I hadn't been downstairs. Not long enough. I'd been on the phone, in the kitchen, with Buster. So who had they heard? The dispatcher broke my thoughts. Emily, officers have just turned onto your street. Relief washed over me. Then, blue and red lights flashed through the bedroom window. I almost cried. They're here, I whispered. They're finally here. Then I looked outside. Only one police cruiser had arrived. Its emergency lights reflected across the houses. The officer stepped out, looked toward the Harper house, and suddenly stopped walking. He wasn't looking at the front door. He was looking across the street, at something or someone. His hand slowly rested on his holster. He stood perfectly still. Then, without saying a word, he backed toward his cruiser, like he'd just seen something. That made even him afraid. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. The officer had his flashlight out. His hand was on his holster, but he wasn't coming toward the house. He was staring across the street, like he'd forgotten we were the emergency. The dispatcher heard me breathing harder. Emily? The officers are outside. Stay where you are. I stepped closer to the bedroom window. Not enough for anyone outside to see me, just enough to see the front yard. The officer slowly lifted his flashlight. The beam swept across the empty road, across the parked cars, across the sidewalk. Then it stopped. Across the street, at the edge of the broken street lamp, there he was. For the first time, I saw him clearly. A tall man, perfectly still, his face hidden behind that blank disguise. His clothes were dark, plain. Nothing about him stood out, except the fact that he wasn't moving, not even a little. The officer shouted something. I couldn't make out the words through the glass. The man didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't step back. He just stood there, watching the house, watching all of us. The officer took a cautious step forward. Another, then another. The man slowly raised one hand, not to wave, not to threaten. He simply pointed toward the Harper house, toward me, toward the upstairs window. The officer instinctively looked up, right at me. For one terrible second, our eyes met. He started yelling. I couldn't hear the words, but I understood what he wanted. Get away from the window. I grabbed Ethan and Lily and pulled them down below the windowsill. At that exact moment, every light in the house went out. The television, the lamps, the hallway lights, everything. Darkness swallowed the house. Lily screamed. Buster erupted into barking somewhere downstairs. The dispatcher was still talking, but her voice kept breaking apart. Emily, stay. Officers. The call started cutting in and out. I looked at my phone. No service. That made no sense. I'd had a signal all night. Now, nothing. Outside, I heard tires screech. Then a car door slam. Someone shouted. Then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I held both kids as close as I could. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then, from downstairs, a single sound echoed through the dark house. Click. The unmistakable sound of the front door slowly opening. Nobody breathed. Not me, not Ethan, not Lily. The only sound in the entire house was Buster downstairs, barking, then growling, then silence again. The front door creaked a little farther open. I could hear it, slow, patient, like whoever was opening it had absolutely no reason to rush. I pulled the kids farther back into the master bedroom. "Ethan," I whispered, "help me push the dresser." He didn't ask why. He just nodded. The two of us shoved the heavy dresser in front of the bedroom door. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Lily buried her face against my side. "Emily, is somebody in our house?" I looked at her. Every part of me wanted to lie, to tell her everything was okay. Instead, I squeezed her hand. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." I meant it, even if I had no idea how I was supposed to keep that promise. Then, a sound from the hallway. Footsteps, not fast, not heavy, just one step. Another. Another. The floorboards groaned outside the bedroom. They stopped, right outside the door. None of us made a sound. Then, 3 slow knocks. My knock. A pause. My knock. Another pause. My knock. The same rhythm, the same impossible patience. Lily started crying into my shoulder. Ethan's hands were shaking. I pressed one finger to my lips. "Don't make a sound." The person outside spoke. His voice was exactly the same as it had been on the phone. Calm, quiet, almost gentle. "Emily." My blood froze. He knew exactly which room we were in. He knew my name. He continued, "You've done a good job." A long silence. "The children are still alive." I felt Ethan grab my sleeve. He was trying not to cry. The man let out a slow breath. "I'll ask you one time." Another pause. "Open the door." Nobody answered. The silence stretched so long, I almost convinced myself he'd left. Then, a soft chuckle, not loud, not exaggerated, just enough to tell us he was still there. His final words were barely above a whisper. "You keep looking outside for me." And I'm finally where I've wanted to be all night. Inside, the hallway went silent again. Then, without warning, the bedroom doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned once, then stopped. Nobody moved. I couldn't even hear myself breathing anymore. I tightened my grip around Lily with one arm, while Ethan stood beside me, clutching a baseball bat he'd found in the bedroom closet with both hands. The silence outside the door felt worse than the knocking, because now he was listening, waiting, testing us. Then a voice boomed from outside. "Police, come out with your hands where I can see them." Another voice. "Front of the house, move." For the first time all night, the still man reacted. The hallway floor creaked. One step, then another. Not running, walking, always walking. The bedroom doorknob went still. A second later, Buster exploded into barking downstairs. A crash echoed through the house. Glass shattered. Someone yelled. Then 2 deafening gunshots rang out. "Bang! Bang!" Lily screamed. Ethan covered his ears. I couldn't tell who had fired or at whom. Then everything went quiet. Again, minutes later, I heard someone pounding on the bedroom door. "Police! Emily! If you're in there, it's over." I didn't move. I couldn't. The officer had to repeat himself 3 more times before I finally pushed the dresser aside. When I opened the door, the hallway was filled with flashing blue and red lights pouring through the windows. 2 officers stood outside. Another officer was kneeling downstairs beside Buster, gently holding him back. The moment Buster saw me, he broke free and ran straight to my legs. I dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around him. I don't think I've ever cried harder in my life. The officers searched every room, the attic, the basement, the closets, the garage, the backyard. Nothing. He was gone, as if he'd disappeared into the night. The investigation lasted for months. Detectives photographed muddy footprints outside the backyard fence. The front door showed signs that someone had tampered with the lock before. That night, the porch camera had been deliberately repositioned. Several neighbors admitted they'd seen a tall man standing across the street during the previous week. But nobody had called the police. Everyone assumed he was waiting for someone. I moved away. Not long after that, the Harpers sold the house. Ryan moved. Hannah and Marcus still check on me all the time. Even now, years later, none of us can explain how he knew so much about our lives. The police never identified him, never found a fingerprint, never recovered a clear image of his face. Nothing. People still ask me one question. Do you think he'll ever come back? I always give them the same answer. I don't know. But if you ever look out your window late at night and you see someone standing perfectly still, don't assume they're looking at your house. They might be looking at you. Because that's the thing people never understood about the still man. He doesn't choose houses. He chooses people. And by the time you realize you've been chosen, he's already been watching for much longer than you think. You've reached the end of tonight's transmission. But whether the story ends here isn't for us to decide. If tonight's broadcast taught us anything, it's that fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stands there, waiting for you to notice. Thank you for tuning in to Red Frequency TV, where every transmission leaves a signal behind. Until our frequencies cross again, sleep lightly, lock your doors, and if you hear something outside tonight, don't be too quick to tell yourself it's nothing. Good night. And don't listen alone. Don't watch alone. The radio crackles violently for a brief second, then fades into complete